The question every master asks, is this as good as I can do? Buddha's method? We often come to the meditation to gain a sense of peace and calm, to find some rest. And it is important that we gain these things from the meditation. We learn how to breathe in a way that calms the body, calms the mind. We think in ways that calm the body, calm the mind. And these are skills we can develop to benefit the mind. But they're not the whole story. In spite of what you may have heard, we cannot relax our way to awakening or decree that awakening means being perfectly happy right as we are. When you look at the Buddha's similes for people who practice, or at the similes given by the great Ajahns, you never find the image of someone relaxing his or her way to awakening, or just sitting back and saying, "I'll be okay the way I am right where I am." The similes all have to do with people who are searching, people developing skills, warriors going into battle, people who have a goal and who will do everything they can to reach that goal. The people searching are searching either to get away from suffering or to get towards something that they can use to assuage their suffering. As the Buddha said, all our searches begin from suffering, from pain. We get mystified by pain. You can imagine being a little child with no knowledge of language, so that nobody can explain things to you. You encounter pain, and you don't understand it. All you know is that you want to get away from it or get rid of it. As the Buddha said, your response is twofold: bewilderment, and then a search for someone who might help get you past this pain. In the beginning, the someone is your parents, but you find that there are pains that your parents can't assuage, so you go looking for other people. So we're always looking for something. As the Buddha said, for most of us, life is a search. The only people for whom it's not a search are people who are already awakened. Everybody else is looking for something. The search that's most worthwhile to conduct, he said, is a noble search, one that looks for a way out of pain and suffering and ends up finding a happiness that's reliable, harmless, and will not change. A happiness free from birth, aging, illness, and death. That's the kind of search that's really worth it, and it requires that you develop skills and do battle with your unskillful tendencies. So it's good to think about where, as a meditator, you're similar to a person developing a skill, and where you're similar to a warrior. And the list of qualities comes down to the factors for awakening. In both cases, you have to be mindful. In the case of the person developing a skill, you have to remember the lessons you've learned from others and from what you've done in the past so that you can compare them with what you're doing right now as you develop your skill. Then you use the factor the Buddha called analysis of qualities, where you actually examine what you're doing and make comparisons. Is this as good as you can do it, or could it be better? If it's not as good as you can do it, what are you doing wrong? You look at your own physical motions. Say, you're making an object, like a pot. You look at the motions of your hands and your body as you try to shape the pot, but you also look at the attitude of the mind. Where is your mind right now? Is it on what you're doing, or is it wandering off someplace else? If you're a person developing a skill, you have to be right there. Skills for awakening. Years back, I was visiting a huge pottery shed in Thailand, and I watched a potter throw a pot on a wheel. I mentioned to him, "You must have good concentration in order to keep that up." And he said, "Yes, your mind has to be set straight. In other words, you've got to be steadily right there. Then you have to be able to notice when your hand has moved off in the wrong direction and to figure out what you need to do in order to bring it back." This is where analysis of qualities moves into persistence. You've got to keep at it and keep at it. You can't be mindful and alert and concentrated just for a few moments and then start thinking about other things, hoping that your hands will be able to do things on their own. You've got to be right there on top of what you're doing. Then, as the Buddha said, When you develop the quality of being really persistent at being skillful, there arises a rapture not of the flesh. In other words, the happiness that comes from doing something well. This is not the happiness of gaining a thing or a pleasant sensation. It's the deeper happiness that comes from knowing you've mastered something. And then to support all this, you need the qualities of calm, concentration, and equanimity. Calm keeps you balanced and at ease so that you can stick with your craft easily for long periods of time. Concentration keeps you focused on what you're doing. Equanimity is needed to observe things carefully so that you can make clear and accurate judgments. Here, as we meditate, we're observing the mind as we're trying to get it calm and still, because when it gets still, you see things more clearly. But we don't simply stop with the calm and the stillness. When you look at the list of the factors for awakening, they move from mindfulness and the discernment in analysis of qualities on through concentration and equanimity, but they don't stop there. You have to take the equanimity and the concentration and turn them around to look at what you're doing. Where are you causing yourself unnecessary suffering? In the same way that a potter has to keep looking to see what he's doing well, what he's not doing well. He has to have a certain equanimity about when things are working and when they're not. If you don't have equanimity and steadiness of mind, then when things are not working, you get upset. It gets in the way of solving the problem. And sometimes it even gets in the way of being willing to recognize the problem. The same list of qualities apply to a warrior. The warrior has to be mindful to remember what he's learned both in school, if he went to warrior school, and what he's learned from his own battles in the past. And, like the skilled potter, he has to have some ability to analyze his own actions, as well as the actions of the enemy, to see what he needs to do. This requires some ingenuity. As we've heard many times, armies usually prepare for war by preparing for the last war. That's how we live our lives even in peacetime. But, of course, new things come up in each new war. It's only the people who've developed their ingenuity who are able to solve the new problems as they arise. This also applies to you as a meditator. New things will come up. Not every defilement or distraction that comes into the mind is explained in the texts or the Dhamma talks you've heard. You've got to figure out, where exactly is the allure of this particular instance of greed, aversion, or delusion? You may not be able to foresee the particulars of a particular defilement, but you can learn the basic principles of how to approach a problem skillfully. You look for the allure, and you look for the drawbacks. You look to see, when something comes up in the mind, why you go for it, and then you look at the results to see the harm they cause. If you're being very honest with yourself, this is where, again, the qualities of calm and equanimity come together with persistence. You keep at this, but notice, the equanimity of a warrior is not the equanimity that says, I'll just put up with whatever. If I lose, that's okay. If I win, that's okay. You have to want to win, really want to win. Remember the desire that underlies the search for victory. Equanimity is for the instances where, if you do lose a battle, you can't let yourself get upset. You just prepare for the next battle. What you want is the equanimity that persists, that doesn't give up, and that also works together with a sense of well-being when you've won a war or when you've done something well. This, in the factors for awakening, would be called rapture or piti, a word that also means refreshment. It's basically an energizing quality that comes when you've mastered a skill or won a battle. You also need the ability to keep the mind calm in the midst of all the things that are coming at you. Imagine what it's like to be in a battle. Arrows are flying. People are yelling all sorts of insults and threats at you. In one of the images in the canon, the Buddha says you've got to be like an elephant in battle. Horrifying sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations are going to come at it in the course of the battle, but the elephant can't lose heart, can't let himself be affected by them. As a meditator, both as you're living in daily life and as you're meeting up with difficulties in your meditation, you can't let yourself get discouraged. You've got to maintain your calm and concentrate on what really needs to be done. So when you think about these analogies, the skilled craftsman, the warrior, it helps you to understand what the Buddha's talking about when he talks about mindfulness, analysis of qualities, persistence, rapture, calm, concentration, and equanimity. All the factors for awakening. You're not just simply being calm and equanimous, telling yourself that the mind is a lot calmer when it isn't trying than when it is trying. That doesn't get anywhere. When you're working on your concentration, you have to really want to get the mind concentrated. You have to want to do the path for it to work. The people who tell you that the desire for awakening is the one thing that's going to keep you from being awakened are people who don't know how to handle their desires. As the Buddha said, all phenomena or dhammas are rooted in desire, and that includes the path to awakening. Awakening itself is not rooted in desire. It's not a thing. Nibbana isn't even a phenomenon, according to the Buddha. But the path is a phenomenon, and it has to be based on desire. This means that you have to learn how to train your desires so that, instead of getting in the way, they inform and nurture your mindfulness, your analysis of qualities, persistence, and concentration. And they have to inform even your calm and equanimity. You do this by approaching the path as a craftsman, searching to master a skill, or as a warrior in search of victory. The knowledge we gain along the path is not the kind of knowledge we can get from books. Books are helpful. They give us pointers. They tell us where to look, what questions to ask. But we're the ones who have to find the answers, using our own ingenuity, so that in the search for awakening, we really do find what we're looking for, something that is timeless, deathless, something that doesn't disappoint and doesn't cause harm. So, think of these analogies and practice in line with them. Do what you can to be up for the challenge of the practice, because there are a lot of things in the mind that won't be willing to go away nicely once you've decided you want to find awakening. They want to hold on. And where do they come from? They come from your own actions. This is what makes it difficult, because sometimes you feel that you're getting rid of part of yourself, like cutting off your own arm. You're passing judgment on part of yourself. But that's what the analysis of qualities is all about, passing judgment wisely. You're passing judgment on your past actions and sometimes your present habits, but you have to pass judgment in a mature way. As you practice, you'll be seeing certain desires that you used to go for, that you really identified with, and you'll have to see them as enemies. And as the Ajahns say, there are two ways of dealing with enemies. One is to fight them off and chase them out. The other is to try to convert them. But even when you convert them, you've got to be very mindful and very alert and very heedful. Otherwise, when they get their chance, they'll try to turn around and convert you. So it's not an easy task. It requires all your ingenuity in finding ways of giving yourself strength. And getting the mind concentrated and calm is one of those ways. In one of the Buddha's analogies, he describes the practice as being like defending a frontier fortress. Mindfulness is the gatekeeper who makes sure the wrong people don't come into the fortress. Then there are the soldiers of right effort to fight the enemy, and the plastered wall of discernment which provides the enemy with no footholds. And you've got concentration, which provides food for the soldiers and the gatekeeper, the food of rapture and calm. And the equanimity is there in the concentration too, to help you see things clearly, not just to stay where you are, but to see clearly what needs to be done, what has to be accepted, what does not have to be accepted in defending the fortress. When you've got all these qualities working together, you can protect the fortress, and you have the strength and the nourishment to keep at it successfully. So, this is what the concentration is for. It's not just resting for the sake of resting, it's resting for the sake of strength. It's resting for the sake of the tasks that need to be done. One of the Forest Ajahns made a comparison. When you get the mind into calm and concentration, he said, it's like piling up all the materials you're going to need to build a house. But then, if you just stay right there, you'll simply have a pile of materials. It won't give you the shelter you need. The next step is to build the house so that you can get some real use out of it. Building the house stands for using your concentration to gain discernment. This means that we practice concentration, we get the mind calm, we focus on the present moment as nourishment, as strength, as materials that we then fashion with our skills so that we can find the object of our search and find an object at the end of the search that really puts an end to searches. That's the point where the craftsman can put down his or her tools. As a warrior, you can put down your weapons because you found a victory that exceeds all your possible desires. So we don't deny that we have desires. We simply learn how to train them to be mindful and wise, and to approach our happiness as something that requires a skill to master. When we see the path as a question of mastering skills, that's when we really understand it, and we can carry through with it, realizing that sometimes it'll involve battles. We make the path our own and give ourselves the chance to emerge victorious. Factors for awakening. Several years back, I was asked to give a talk on the factors for awakening: mindfulness, analysis of qualities, persistence, rapture, calm, concentration, and equanimity. And it turned out that the people who'd organized the event had asked for that topic under the impression that the factors for awakening were a description of the awakened mind, the goal toward which we were aiming, whereas they're actually a path leading to awakening. Part of the misunderstanding was based on the question of how to translate the Pali term Bojjhaṅga, awakening factors. Because it's a compound, it could be factors of awakening, but if you actually look at how these factors are explained in the text, the meaning of the term is very much factors for awakening. These are qualities of mind you develop in order to become awakened. You can't take awakening and develop it. You can't clone the awakened state, but you can work on developing everyday factors of the mind that eventually will lead to awakening. This is one of the important aspects of the Buddha's teaching. The path to awakening is built out of very ordinary, day-to-day things, like mindfulness and alertness. It's simply that when you learn how to look at them in a new way, to analyze them in a new way, and to develop and use them in a new way, they can take you all the way to awakening. This is especially important when you try to understand the second factor for awakening, analysis of qualities, which is the heart of the set. As the people who had arranged that event said, their impression of this factor was that in the awakened mind, everything is just mental qualities arising, passing away, arising, passing away, with a great lightness. You see these things coming and going, and they don't weigh on the mind anymore, which is a stage of the path, but to look at the factor in that way misses out on a very useful aspect of what it's all about. When the Buddha talks about developing that factor, he says it's a matter of paying appropriate attention to what's skillful and what's not, and then, based on that factor, you develop the next factor, which is persistence in actually developing what's skillful and abandoning what's not. So instead of trying to clone yourself into a very rarefied state, the Buddha's asking you to look very carefully at what you're doing. You apply appropriate attention to what you're doing in body, speech, and mind, but especially mind, to see how skillful your actions are. We often describe appropriate attention as looking at things in terms of the Four Noble Truths, but that level of appropriate attention builds on another level of appropriate attention, which is simply seeing what's skillful and unskillful in your actions, judging your actions by the results they yield. This involves questioning. It's not simply a matter of conviction, although the simple fact that you're going to follow this path of looking at what's skillful and unskillful requires that you be convinced that the Buddha knew what he was talking about. That, and conviction that there are wise people who've been trained in this path and who know what they're talking about too. Because when the Buddha asks you to look at what's skillful and unskillful in general terms, as when he's talking to the Kalamas, He says that it's not simply a matter of judging things in terms of your own experience and your own standards. It also involves taking into account the teachings of the wise, people whose behavior you've looked at carefully and whom you've learned to trust. As the Buddha shows in his instructions to Rahula, you don't just look at your own actions and then come to conclusions about them. If you find that you've made a mistake or done something harmful, you go talk to somebody else who's more advanced on the path. In other words, you seek the counsel of the wise. So it's a matter partly of looking for yourself and partly of taking into account the advice you get from wise people who have more experience on the path than you do. Now, you recognize wise people by using your own powers of judgment as honestly as you can. So in the ultimate analysis, appropriate attention does come down to your willingness to look at actions, to see where they're causing suffering, and to ask yourself questions. Okay, where is this suffering? Exactly what am I stressed out about? Do wise people do these sorts of things too? You may have some general knowledge on the basic principle that stress comes from craving and clinging, but the Buddha wants you to go beyond general principles. He wants you to see specific things arising and passing away. When does the stress come? When does it get intensified? When does it weaken? What else happens in the mind at the same time that it's intensifying? What else is happening at the same time it's weakening? That's applying appropriate attention. Now, to do this, of course, you need to develop the other factors for awakening, starting with mindfulness. Mindfulness, in the Buddha's sense of the term, means keeping something in mind. Right mindfulness means keeping in mind your resolve to stay with the body or with feelings or with mind states or with mental qualities in and of themselves as your primary frame of reference at the same time that you put aside greed and distress with reference to the world. The word primary here is important, because there's no way you're going to be focused on the body without noticing feelings or mind states or mental qualities. After all, they all come together right here. This is why the Buddha says that you can focus on any of the four and follow it all the way to awakening. You choose one of them as being primary, and then you relate the other three to that primary focus. For instance, right now we're with the breath, which is the frame of reference that the Buddha recommends most specifically for dealing with all four frames. When feelings come up, relate them to the breath. How does the breath affect the feelings? How do the feelings affect the way you breathe? For instance, if there's a pain in your body, do you tend to breathe in a way that walls off the pain so that it doesn't spread? We often have a sense of the breath spreading, but we don't like the idea of the pain spreading, so we tense up around it so that it doesn't spread along with the breath. If you find yourself doing that subconsciously, ask yourself, what if I deliberately think of the breath going through the pain? Can I open up that part of the body? In this way, you keep the breath as primary, and then the pain becomes secondary, simply related to the breath. The same principle applies to mind states. Certain mind states are fostered by tense or constricted breathing. Other more skillful states are fostered by a sense of breath that flows thoroughly throughout the body, refreshing the body. You want to notice that and take advantage of it. Now notice, we're not simply staying with the breath or feelings or mind states simply as they are. We're trying to do something skillful with them. This counts as the quality of ardency that, as part of right mindfulness, the Buddha also has you keep in mind. If you see that a certain way of breathing, a certain feeling, or a certain mind state is leading to unskillful thoughts, words, or deeds, change it. If any of these things lead to skillful thoughts, words, and deeds, you maintain them and try to develop them. It's not that these tools we develop as part of right mindfulness are for use only while we're here sitting with our eyes closed. They're meant to be used throughout the day. Somebody says something and you notice a catch in the breath. You can take that as a warning sign that something's going on in the mind as well. You've reacted to what that person has said. And if you have the time, you want to look into it. If you don't have time, Just make a mental note and then try to breathe through whatever tension has developed in the breath so that you're not carrying that little bit of tension around with you for the rest of the day. Otherwise, it acts like a magnet. It attracts other little bits and pieces of tension until you've got a huge armor or a huge cluster of tension that's invaded the body. And then there's the problem of how to get it out. Whereas it's a lot easier if you begin to notice the little pieces as they form and you can breathe right through them to make them dissolve away. That's the function of what the Buddha calls mindfulness as a governing principle. As you're anchored with the breath in the present moment, you make good things come and stay, and you make bad things go. This puts you in a better position to look at the mind. Again, your basic foundation is the breath, and you watch the mind from the position of a very comfortable, very refreshing, very fulfilling way of breathing. You see the mind in a very different light than if you were looking at it from a feeling of being all tensed, tight, and wound up. So that's mindfulness. As you practice mindfulness in this way, you're already beginning to develop analysis of qualities, seeing which mind states or which breath states or breath patterns are skillful and which ones are not. And you learn how to foster the skillful ones. This is another area where conviction comes in. As the Buddha says, if it weren't possible to develop skillful qualities and to abandon unskillful ones, he wouldn't have taught people to do that. If it weren't the case that you would benefit from developing skillful ones and abandoning unskillful ones, he wouldn't have taught that either. And you need to have conviction that he knows what he's talking about. But this factor of analysis of qualities is very much a path factor, not a factor to arrive at. It's what enables you to see what needs to be done. Then based on that, you develop the factor of persistence, which is the same as the ardency in right mindfulness, and the same as right effort. And to encourage persistence, it's good to develop heedfulness, realizing that you really do need to develop skillful qualities now. You can't wait until tomorrow, or next week, or next month, or next year. You need to do this now. After all, you could die at any moment. Not just physical death, your goodness could die at any moment. Something could come up. Either a thought about something that someone has done or said, or an actual event right here, right now, that could catch you off guard, and you could do or say things that are really harmful. That can happen at any time. So you have to be careful. You have to be heedful all the time. When you're heedful like this, the other factors for awakening come in. The factors that show how mindfulness and discernment, the first two factors, lead to concentration. There's the rapture that comes as the mind gets more and more full, as your sense of the breath energy gets more and more full. You're not wounding it with unskillful thoughts, unskillful attitudes, or unskillful ways of breathing, so its fullness can grow. From that there's calm. From calm, there's concentration. And when the mind is concentrated and calm, it can look at things with a more solid sense of equanimity. As the Buddha said, there are levels of equanimity. The lowest level is what he calls equanimity based on diversity. You simply make up your mind that whatever comes up in terms of sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, or ideas, you're going to try to stay non-reactive. That kind of equanimity can be maintained as long as you maintain your mindfulness and your will to be non-reactive. A lot stronger, though, is the equanimity that the Buddha says is based on unification, i.e., when the mind really settles down and is one. With that sense of calm, well-being, and fullness, you feel less touched by events because you've got something much better to feed on. You're not going out nibbling off other people's words or gulping down sensual pleasures, because you've got something much better right here. It's not simply a matter of willing yourself not to react. You don't feel any need to react. But we're not practicing these things just to arrive at equanimity. That's another problem with seeing the awakening factors as a map of the enlightened mind. Many people think, well, all you need to do is arrive at equanimity and there you are. Nibbana. But that's not the case. Nibbana is not the ultimate equanimity. It's the ultimate happiness. Equanimity is part of the path. You gain equanimity toward all the things that are not important in life so that you can keep analyzing that issue of what's skillful and unskillful in the mind, and can do that analysis with more subtlety and precision. That's what equanimity is for. What the Buddha's doing is putting you in a position where your happiness depends more and more on one thing: the good qualities of the mind as it's trained. You then use this sense of well-being to pry away your attachments to other things, because you can see, when you do this sort of action, bodily or verbal, you get these results. When you foster this quality of mind, you get these results. And when you foster that quality of mind, you get other kinds of results. You get more and more sensitive to where there's stress. Then you know what to do to get rid of that stress. Again, you have to look at the particulars so that you can apply a precise solution. This is why analysis of qualities is the central factor here. You're looking at events. The word Dhamma, qualities, can also mean events or actions, and here we're particularly looking at mental actions. Look at your actions and see what you're doing. Where there's stress, what you did to aggravate that stress. What you could do to undercut it, i.e., how you abandon the cause. You follow these questions all the way to the questions about wherever there's anything that's inconstant, it's stressful. Wherever there's anything that's stressful, it's to be regarded as not self, something to let go, let go, let go. But all of these qualities working together are needed to take you to awakening. If you try to do the letting go without having developed concentration, the insights can get very dry and very alienating. I've heard of people letting go of their sense of self prematurely and getting very disoriented as a result. They think, wow, I've let go of my sense of self, so it must be awakening. But it's not. It's destabilizing. They've cut away all the tools they need in order to stay on the path. After all, you do need a sense of self to function on the path. A wise sense of self, a skillful sense of self, which you've been developing as part of the path. You let it go only when you don't need it anymore. And part of that sense of self is the state of well-being that comes when you get the mind into good, strong concentration. So all these factors are needed. But it's important to remember that they are a path. You're not trying to clone awakening. You're not trying to will the mind into some expansive, unconditioned state. The path to awakening is followed in little tiny incremental steps, looking at each of your actions and every instance of stress as it comes up. The more precisely you can see these things, the more clearly you can see exactly where you're causing suffering and how you can stop. Seek the counsel of the wise when you need it, but otherwise stay focused right here on the particulars. It's through the particulars that you break through to a state that's totally unlimited and not defined in any way at all. It's called freedom because in reaching that state, we're freed from our defilements. In other words, it's called freedom as a comparison, but in and of itself, it can't properly be described. That's a sign of how special it is. Mindfulness. When the Buddha lists the factors for awakening, he says that there are some that are appropriate when the mind is sluggish. Those factors are analysis of qualities, rapture, and persistence, the qualities that energize the mind. Then, there are qualities appropriate when the mind is overly excited, overly energetic, calm, equanimity, and concentration. Those calm the mind down. You need both sets of qualities in the practice. It's simply a matter of finding balance and of having a sense of time and place. There's one quality, though, that's appropriate everywhere, all the time. That's mindfulness. So it's especially important, as we practice, that we understand what mindfulness is. Sometimes you hear that mindfulness is simply an open, accepting awareness of things. just noting what's happening and allowing it to happen without interfering. But that's actually equanimity. The Buddha himself defines mindfulness as the ability to remember for a long time what's been done and said. It's the ability to keep things in mind. And what do you keep in mind? To begin with, you keep in mind the need to develop the skillful factors of the path and to abandon the unskillful ones. This applies to all the factors. Once you know what's right view, what's wrong view, right resolve, wrong resolve, all the way down to right concentration and wrong concentration, you keep in mind your intention to develop the right side and to abandon the wrong. The Buddha compares mindfulness to a gatekeeper for a frontier fortress. In a frontier fortress, you have to be very wary because there are spies and other people from the outlying countries. They want to sneak in and do damage to your fortress. So you have to be very careful who comes in and who doesn't. And mindfulness, the Buddha says, is like a wise gatekeeper who recognizes who should be let in and who should not be let in, and he lets in only those who should be let in. So you have to keep this distinction in mind. Which qualities in the mind are skillful and which ones are not? Which ones should be developed and which ones abandoned? There's another passage where the Buddha says that mindfulness is like a goad. Most of us have gotten away from animal husbandry and farming, and so we don't even know what a goad is. It's a long stick with a sharp point. You use it to poke your animals when they're going the wrong direction, or if they're standing still when they should be going. The implication here is that the ability to remember what's skillful and what's not, and to be able to give yourself a little push or a poke in the right direction, that's what mindfulness does for you. And sometimes it's more than just a little poke. There's another passage where the Buddha says that when you see that something unskillful has arisen in your mind, then you act as if your hair were on fire. You do everything you can, as quickly as you can, to put it out. You're relentless and mindful in being focused on putting out the fire and nothing else. So all of these passages show that mindfulness is not just a broad, open, accepting state of mind. It serves a particular purpose, and it can be narrowly focused, keeping in mind what you know about what's skillful and what's not, and reminding yourself that you really do want to focus on pursuing the skillful path and avoiding the unskillful one at all costs. This is why mindfulness and discernment usually go together. In fact, in Thai, they have a term, satipanya, mindfulness discernment, which is their word for intelligence. It's the intelligence of a really practical person, one who knows the distinction between what's skillful and what's not, and is wise enough to know that you have to keep that in mind so that you can act on it all the time. In the Buddha's portrayal of how all the different factors of the path work together, right mindfulness, right view, which is the discernment factor, and right effort all go together. You have right view about what's right and what's wrong, what's skillful and what's not. You keep that in mind. You keep in mind your desire to do the right thing, and you motivate yourself to act on that desire. That's right mindfulness. As the Pali phrase describing right effort says, you generate the desire to prevent unskillful qualities that haven't arisen from arising and abandon them if they have arisen. At the same time, you generate the desire to give rise to skillful qualities, and then, once they're there, you encourage them, develop them. So you're not just sitting here watching things coming and going, arising and passing away, and saying, well, that's that. You realize that your mind is the factor that shapes your life, and that its decisions will have a huge impact. You keep that in mind. And when the mind begins to wander off, you use the goad of mindfulness to bring it right back. Sometimes all you have to do is simply remind it, and it'll come back. Other times, it's a bit more resistant. That's when you give it a sharp poke. This is where you can use other meditation techniques as well. But mindfulness helps there too. It has to keep in mind all the various techniques that you've heard about and that you've actually put into practice and found that they work, You've got to keep all that in mind. Because we do have this tendency to forget. Sometimes the forgetting is just a simple dropping of what we were trying to remember, and other times it's willful forgetfulness, when part of the mind has decided it's not interested in the path at all. It wants to go off and get a little pleasure on the side, fantasizing about this beautiful person, that lovely sound, those nice flavors, whatever you're fantasizing about. When you're in that state of mind, you willfully forget the fact that you're sitting here meditating or that you're trying to follow a path of practice. That's when mindfulness has to be especially sharp in reminding you. So try to be very clear about what mindfulness does. We're not here just to watch things arise and pass away, trying to be equanimous. There are times when equanimity is going to be needed, but not the type of equanimity that simply lets things take over, regardless of whether they're good or bad. There are times when equanimity is skillful, and times when it's not. You want to keep in mind the Buddha's teachings. You want to keep in mind the Buddha's example. You want to keep in mind whatever other teachings you've heard that are skillful, along with your own discoveries concerning your own mind about what's skillful and what's not, and what works and what doesn't work. This is why mindfulness is useful at all times, everywhere, regardless of whether the mind is sluggish or over-energized. You can't let yourself forget these things. Otherwise, it's like having a water buffalo when you have no goad, no control over the buffalo at all. If you're trying to plow the field, the buffalo will just go anywhere it wants and then stop whenever it wants. The field never gets plowed, and you never get done with your work. So remember that little voice inside that remembers to be heedful, that remembers to be on top of things, and remembers the importance of your actions. Your actions really do shape your life. They really do shape your meditation. The decisions you're making from moment to moment to moment are important. Keep that point in mind and you'll find that it really helps you keep on track and keeps you at work. And if the work seems tiresome, remember that it's not all just work. You can have elements of calm, concentration, and rapture, all the good parts of the path as well as the carrot to nourish you. But the mindfulness is the stick. You need both the carrot and the stick in order to get your field plowed so that it will provide the food you need for your true well-being. Analysis of qualities. We all come to the practice with doubts and questions, but we don't get past our doubts by not asking questions. We do it by learning how to ask the right questions. There's a passage where the Buddha talks about how to overcome doubt. He says it's by paying appropriate attention to the qualities of the mind to see whether they're skillful or unskillful, dark or bright. And that's the same approach he recommends for developing what's called analysis of qualities as a factor for awakening. You bring appropriate attention to qualities of mind to see whether they're skillful or not, dark or bright. Now, analysis of qualities is the discernment factor in those factors for awakening. This means that you replace doubt not with belief, but with discernment. In both cases, dealing with the doubt and developing the discernment, appropriate attention is how you do it. Appropriate attention is basically learning how to ask the right questions, focused on the issue of what you're doing and the results of what you're doing. The Buddha himself said he got on the right path by noticing that he could divide his thoughts into two sorts: those imbued with sensuality, ill will, or cruelty on the one hand, and those imbued with renunciation, non-ill will, i.e., goodwill, and harmlessness on the other. And he divided the thoughts into those categories not in terms of what he liked or didn't like, or what he found entertaining or instructive or interesting. Instead, the question was, where do these thoughts lead? The unskillful side led to all kinds of unskillful behavior. The skillful side led to more skillful behavior. So he decided to keep his unskillful thoughts in check in the same way that a cowherd keeps his cows in check during the rainy season. In Asia, during the rainy season when the rice is growing, You have to be very careful that your cows don't wander into the rice fields. Otherwise, they'll eat the rice and cause trouble with the rice farmers. So if you see them heading toward the rice, you've got to check them, beat them back. As for skillful thoughts, he saw no problem. In that case, they would be like the cows during the dry season. The rice has been harvested. There's no danger of their eating the rice in the rice fields, so you can let the cows wander where they like. But even then, if you thought skillful thoughts for 24 hours, it would tire the mind. When the mind is tired, it's more likely to go back to unskillful thinking. This was when he realized that he should bring his mind to concentration to get it calm and still. But even getting the mind into concentration requires that you do some questioning. And here again, you apply appropriate attention. When the Buddha discusses the factors for awakening, he says that they're fulfilled by following the 16 steps of breath meditation. And in the 16 steps, the questions of discernment concerning the mind have to do with: what is the state of your mind right now? Is it in balance or out of balance? If you find that it's out of balance, in which direction is it leaning? And what do you do to bring it back in line? For instance, if you're feeling depressed, irritated, or down, what can you do to gladden the mind? If the mind is scattered, what can you do to make it more solid? The 16 steps also give you some advice on how to answer those questions. They require first, though, that you understand the process of fabrication in the present moment. Fabrication, sankhara, comes in 3 types: bodily, verbal, and mental. Bodily is the in and out breath. Verbal is the way you talk to yourself before you break into speech. Technically, this is called directed thought and evaluation, directing your thoughts to an object and evaluating it, asking questions or commenting on it. Mental covers perceptions and feelings. Perceptions are the labels you apply to things. Feelings are feelings of pleasure, pain, or neither pleasure nor pain. If you want to gladden the mind or steady the mind, to get rid of unskillful qualities and develop skillful ones, you have to work first with mental fabrications, your feelings and perceptions. What images do you hold in mind? The same as when you're dealing with the breath. What kind of image do you have of the breath? It's good to think of the breath as the energy flowing throughout the body, down through the nerves, down through the blood vessels, out to the tips of the fingers, out to the tips of the toes, all around, because that perception of the breath allows feelings of ease to spread easily through the body. It makes the body a more pleasant place to stay. When the body is pleasant, the mind gets into a better mood. It's not so irritable. And you can both gladden the mind and steady the mind by making the body feel pleasant through the breath. So you've been working with all 3 kinds of fabrication there. First, you have the perception. And then you work with bodily fabrication, the way you breathe based on that perception, and then the way you breathe gives rise to a feeling of pleasure. You allow that feeling to spread. In the meantime, you're talking to yourself about how to do this well. You're noticing what works, what doesn't work. That's how you develop your discernment, and that's how you overcome doubt. Ajahn Fuang had a nice passage in one of his Dhamma talks where he said that if you have doubts about things, just ask yourself, is the breath coming in? Is the breath going out? Or is it still? Something that's right there. And if you can doubt this, he said, you're going to doubt everything in life. So at least you have something really sure right here that you can begin with. You know what the breath is doing, but you still may not yet be so clear as to whether it's comfortable or not. Well, you experiment. Try different ways of breathing. Try different ways of perceiving the breath, thinking of it coming in, maybe not through the nose, but through the eyes, the ears, down from the top of the head, coming in through the forehead, coming in from behind, coming into the back of the neck, going down the spine. When you think of the breath in those ways, what does it do to the sensation of breathing? Or, while you breathe in, you can think of the fact that even though the air is coming in through the nose and into the lungs, The energy that allows that to happen is actually spreading from within the body itself. It can spread from the area around the navel, the area around the breastbone, any place in the body, actually. And if you hold that perception in mind, how does it affect the way you breathe? Does it give rise to a sense of ease? If so, maintain that perception and maintain that kind of breathing. You find that it has a calming effect on the mind, gladdening it if it's been feeling irritated, steadying it if it's been feeling scattered. At the same time, you're beginning to understand the process by which you create your experience of the present moment through these processes of fabrication. It's in this way that discernment can lead to concentration. That's one of the basic patterns of the factors for awakening as a set. They start with mindfulness, followed by discernment, the analysis of qualities factor, and then they end up in concentration. They basically show how, starting with mindfulness, you use your discernment to get the mind to settle down. They explain how right view gets you from right mindfulness to right concentration, or how discernment fosters concentration. Now, the Buddha has other lists of teachings where things happen the other way around. You get the mind focused on establishing mindfulness, from which you then develop concentration, and then the discernment comes. It can happen either way. Different people will find that different lists describe the way their minds work, and even one person will find that the processes of the mind can vary from day to day. The ultimate level, of course, is when discernment develops your concentration at the same time that concentration develops your discernment. So, even though these factors in the different lists come in a row, the later factors turn around and help the ones earlier on in the list. In this way, they all work together to get the mind in the proper state where you have no doubts about what's going on in the mind. You can see it clearly. You begin to see it so clearly that you can understand how the mind creates unnecessary suffering for itself. Because that's the original question we're trying to answer as we follow the Four Noble Truths. Why is there suffering? Because of craving. Where is the craving? The craving is in the mind. So the questions of appropriate attention come back to the questions of the Four Noble Truths, the realization that we're suffering not because of things outside, but because of things the mind is doing. We practice meditation to become more sensitive to exactly what the mind is doing, where it's skillful, where it's not, so that we can stop creating that suffering. Discernment, or wisdom, is pragmatic. We're not here to discover great truths about the world outside. We're here to understand why we're causing suffering and how we can stop. It's a practical question, answered with a practical form of discernment or wisdom. I was recently reading a footnote on the factors for awakening in a Sutta anthology. The author was saying that the factor of analysis of qualities is the wisdom factor in the set. Although, he said, it's defined as looking into what's skillful and what's not skillful in your behavior. I was surprised at the word although there, that somehow understanding what's skillful or not was not a matter of wisdom. That's what the author seemed to be implying, but that's not the case at all. Wise discernment is precisely a quality of understanding what's skillful and what's not, because our minds are primarily active. We need discernment to direct that activity. When our activity is based on ignorance, we create suffering. If we can learn how to base our activity on knowledge, on wisdom, on discernment, we don't suffer. That's what the practice is all about.